Dear everyone, greetings from Asian Productivity Organization. Hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during this pandemic. This is live from the APO Secretariat Office in Tokyo, Japan, and we welcome all our viewers from APO member countries and beyond. I am Asai Thambi Monikam, and thanks to our viewers for joining us on this APO Productivity Talk series. And today we will discuss about Agritech Innovations. The food security is a big concern by 2050 due to rapid increase of global population, and according to UNFAO, the food demand would increase more than 50%, and almost 1 billion people are expected not to get the food what they want. There are different challenges in the agriculture sector like low farm income, small and fragmented land holdings, unorganized supply chains, land saturation, groundwater depletion, inefficient transport and storage facility, and very limited access to finance. On top of that, climate change is a big concern, and it became from a fringe issue to a global top priority, which would impact the agriculture productivity a lot. To solve these challenges, many agritech startups are enabling more efficient market linkage for farmers, distributors, and consumers. Different players are entering this segment and offer new innovative solutions in crop intelligence and monitoring, climate monitoring, input management and procurement, revamping the supply chain to reduce the food wastage, access to advanced hardware and machinery, production linked agri financing, farming as a service, urban farming, and many more. So, what could be the solution to meet this increasing demand of food and ensure food security for next generation? To give more insights about agri-tech innovations and how those innovations are beneficial in increasing the productivity for farmers and different stakeholders. Dear viewers, I am very much delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Hemendra Mathur from India. How are you today, Mr. Hemendra?
Thanks, Asai. I'm doing all right, and thanks for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Dear viewers, before I invite Mr. Hemendra to start his presentation, we would like to encourage our viewers to send your questions and comments in the chat box with your name and country, and we would respond to your questions during Q&A session. Hemendra, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Asai, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the viewers who are joining the session. It's a privilege and an honor to be speaking at this forum about a very important topic on how agri-tech innovations are driving the growth of agriculture, not just in India, but globally. And over the next 40 minutes, I'll be making a presentation on the current status of agri-tech. What are the innovation themes that we are witnessing? Uh, though agri-tech is very new, I say the history of agri-tech in India is just 10 years old, but we are seeing multiple themes solving multiple challenges and problems of farmers. And then how do we look at agri-tech as an entrepreneur and as an investor? So those are the broad discussion points of my talk today. And with that, I would like to share the presentation. Great. So I'll move forward. As I said in my presentation, I will cover what are the challenges which agri-tech is trying to solve, current status of Indian agri-tech in particular, and have picked 6 innovation themes which are evolved in Indian market, and I'll go through them in detail. And what is the ecosystem which is necessary to drive development of agri-tech innovation as well as adoption of agri-tech innovation among farming community? What are my learnings as an investor working with hundreds and thousands of agri-tech entrepreneurs? I would like to share that. And finally, as an investor, what do I look when I invest in an agri-tech enterprise? So what is that Indian agri-tech is trying to solve? I have divided all the issues into three parts: pre-production, production, and post-production. And on the left hand side, on the y axis, you see the issues in supply chain, issues in terms of farmer access, and issues in terms of the data availability. As you would know, that Indian farms are highly fragmented. The average farmland ownership is just 1.02 hectares. 85% of the farmers own land which is less than 2 hectares. We call them small and marginal farmers. So one of the biggest challenge that Agritech is trying to solve is how to make farm economics work on a small parcel of land. So I think that's the first and foremost challenge. Over and above that, we are witnessing significant amount of issues on the climate front. Our soil nutrition profile is deteriorating. The NPK ratio, which is supposed to be 4 is to 2 is to 1, is actually skewed heavily in favor of N. And we are running short of many micronutrients like zinc, like calcium, like magnesium, etc. So solving for soil health is one big challenge. Water stress, we all know how it is affecting agriculture world over, and so more so in India, as we are the world's third uh, highest water stressed country. Groundwater is going down. In some places, we have to dig hundreds of meters to get the groundwater, which is necessary for a significant part of agriculture in India. And of course, then we are seeing volatility in monsoon patterns. We are seeing, unpredictable rains. We are seeing flash floods. So there are enough evidences that climate is changing, which is adversely affecting the crop cycles. On the production side, clearly we are seeing that the farm labor is not available at the time of sowing, at the time of harvest when it is needed. Even if it is available, it is becoming extremely expensive. So we need to solve for farm labor through mechanization. On the post-harvest side, we waste almost one third of the food that we produce. That's not small. The total consumption of food products in India is about a billion ton, 1 billion ton, roughly 300 million tons staples, roughly 300 million tons horticulture produce, roughly 200 million tons of dairy products, and then rest is divided among other products like animal protein, etc. And if you are wasting one third of that, you can imagine that's a massive, massive loss because of poor storage, poor transportation, poor logistics, and significant amount of fragmentation at the distribution end. So I think there's phenomenal amount of challenges that we see across the food supply chain. If I look from a farmer perspective, I don't have access to good quality inputs. And you know how important good quality inputs for good productivity. In many cases, a lot of pesticides and seeds which are sold are fake, not even genuine. Just imagine the plight of the farmer who puts those seed and seed don't germinate. So we need to solve for input supply chain. Farmer access to credit. That's another big challenge. Despite government's best efforts, lending almost $220 billion per annum for agriculture as a priority sector lending, almost one third farmers don't have access to institutional credit and they depend on the informal sources, with the cost of credit is more than 24% per annum, and sometimes it goes to 36% and even 60%. Just imagine how farmer can make money when he's paying so much of interest. Insurance is almost non-existent. Of course, there's a government scheme which is pushing it forward, but a lot of ground to cover. Demand remains a big challenge. The whole supply chain is still supply driven, not demand driven, because of 7 to 8 intermediaries between the farmer and the consumer. So how do we solve for that? How do we give farmer a choice to sell to more buyers, to sell at the right price? So those are the farmer challenges that we see in India. Last but not the least, the data. Data is a huge, huge challenge. We don't get data in time. We don't get data which is accurate. We don't get data which is very, very granular. And that kinds of distort decision making for the farmer. When to sow, when to harvest, when to spray pesticides. It's all gut feel. It's not data driven decision making. It also distorts decision making for value chain players. Someone's selling inputs to farmers, someone who's buying commodities from farmers, someone who's lending to farmers. They also don't get data which can make the process efficient. So I think data is a huge challenge that we need to solve for not just for farmers, but for the entire value chain, right from farmer to aggregator to processor to the consumer. So these are some of the primary challenges which agri-tech is trying to address. Where do we stand when it comes to agri-tech? It started in India at about I would say around 2010-11, and initially in the first phase there was a lot of experimentation and evangelization. Most of the people were skeptical of agri-tech becoming very large in India. What changed was, I would say, the phase two of agri-tech, which started in 2017-18, where we saw an army of agri-tech entrepreneurs. Very interestingly, most of them came from non-agriculture background. Someone who worked in Honeywell, someone who worked in GE, someone who worked in Infosys, TCS, someone who worked in Silicon Valley, coming back to India and trying to solve for challenges in agriculture. So that was fascinating. That so many tech entrepreneurs got into the sector to solve the challenges in a very different way, with the application of interesting technical tools. So I think that is what has changed after that, and the phase two of Indian agri-tech, which is going on for last 5 to 6 years, saw over 1,500 agri-tech startups in the country as we talk today, and I'm very confident that number is going to go beyond 10,000 in next few years. There are not many other sectors which can absorb 10,000 startups in a sustainable way like agritech can do, because this huge opportunity that it presents to a lot of entrepreneurs. Even investors were very skeptical initially, and it was largely driven by impact investors, in the initial days. And the mainstream investors were just fence sitting. But when they saw, especially in COVID, they saw, look, sector is growing despite all the challenges that we see in the world. The supply chains are getting broken and everything is an issue, but agriculture demonstrated growth in all the quarters of pandemic. For a country like India, 1.3 billion, they will just imagine if food supply chain was broken during pandemic, what would have happened? It would have been another pandemic. So I think that kind of gave confidence to investors. Look, there's a lot of resilience in this sector, and if you put in money, there's, of course, you create impact, but you also create commercial opportunity as an investor to get returns. If you look at farmer adoption, in India, we have about 150 million farmers. As I said, on almost 80-85% small and marginal. 120 million farmers are small and marginal. The adoption rate, as per my estimate and as per the estimate of some of the experts, is about 10 to 15%. Not very large, but given the history of agritech, not too bad either. And I'm sure with the adoption of mobile phones, with the access of broadband, with significant 4G penetration, and with 5G coming up, it's a matter of time. You'll see next 3 to 4 years, a lot of these digital solutions which are meant for farmers will go mainstream. And the best part is farmers very comfortable using some of these digital tools against the conventional myth that whether farmers can use this. So I think that is the exciting part of the story, and there's so much ground to cover, and that opens up doors for many new entrepreneurs to try their models. Indian agri-tech is primarily dominated by digital tech, whether we like it or not. Unlike US, unlike Israel, unlike European countries where we see significant participation of biotech entrepreneurs, right? Or other tech which is being used. So in India also we are seeing green shoot of agri-biotech, we are seeing applications of deep tech technologies. We are seeing a lot of nutrition tech and processing tech coming into picture finally, in addition to digital tech. So that's also a very positive factor. A lot of Indian startups are now going global. I think that is another important point I want to mention. That the solution that we are developing in India are for smallholder farmers. And if you look at the application potential of these solutions, whether it's smallholder farmer in Kenya, in Philippines, in Vietnam, in Sri Lanka, I think similar same solutions apply with some bit of customization. So what we're developing in India, we are developing for the globe. There are 500 million smallholder farmers in the world. Almost 2 billion people are dependent on the income coming from smallholder farming. So if we solve for that, just imagine the kind of impact it can have. And we are seeing multiple startups. I've named a few on this slide, but there are many more who are trying to crack global markets with their solutions. Likewise, we are seeing interest from global startups to look at Indian market seriously. Though, like startups from Western world, they've developed solution for large farms, but they say that the opportunity in India is too large to ignore, and they are trying to customize the solution to Indian farming patterns. So that's a very positive phase, and I think organizations like APO can play a huge role in building this global agri-tech corridor. That's what I keep discussing with Asai. How do we develop global agri-tech corridors? How do we make innovation pollinate from one country to another? How do we make it easier for entrepreneurs to get into a new country? How do we, what kind of policy support, ecosystem support can we provide? I think that is going to catalyze huge amount of innovations across the world. Another important point is that corporates, which are largely dominated Indian agribusinesses, and I think it's world over, likes of BSF, Syngenta, you know, in India, players like UPL, PI Industries, Decent Round, the large players, IFCO, and many more on the food processing side. I think the interesting part, they are also talking to Agritech. They're building parallels, they're building partnership. Some of them are launching their own Agritech platform. So they also understand that if they maintain status quo, they will become irrelevant. So corporate startup partnership is something which is shaping up very well. Last but not the least, the government. I think government is a very important actor when it comes to agriculture. In India, we have federal system. So the participation from central government, from state governments becomes extremely critical. And we are seeing phenomenal amount of efforts at both the levels. And I'll talk about some of these initiatives which government of India has taken, which some of the state governments have taken. I think that has played a catalytic role in driving agri-tech innovations as well as adoption. So this is a just brief overview, 30,000 feet overview of where agri-tech in India stands today. Let's go a little bit deeper. What are these solutions, and how are they impacting smallholder farmers in particular? The first and foremost, as I said, access to good quality inputs. The whole supply chain, it's almost a 50-60 billion dollar industry in India. But how do you make sure that the good seeds, good fertilizers, good pesticides, good biostimulants reach to farmers? They typically buy from the shop which is nearest to them within 10 kilometers. They have limited set of products. And as I said, sometimes the products are not even genuine. They sell over the maximum price which is permissible. And that's where these agri-input e-commerce platforms like so Big Heart and AgroStar and Gramophone, Unnati, Behtar Zindagi, I think that developing some very interesting solutions, making these inputs available to the farmer at the right time at the right price. And it is not vanilla selling. It's not like going on an Amazon and buying the products instantly. It typically involves capturing a lot of data about the farm, the soil health, the plant health, the hyperlocal weather parameters, and then tell farmer, look, this is you should be buying 2 bags of urea, you should be buying 50 kgs of DAP, you should be buying few biostimulants, you should be buying this machine. This is very prescriptive selling. That's very important part I want to mention, because it can optimize the cost of agricultural inputs. There are a lot of startups which are also even telling when to irrigate, how much to irrigate, how much water is required, right? So as precise as that, it's really changing the way farming is being done in India. And of course, for this model to scale, since a lot of inputs are sold on credit in India, you need to build credit solutions. Last mile delivery is extremely important. Google Maps, sometimes they work in rural India, sometimes they don't. So you need to figure out how do you make sure that you can deliver uh, these products at farmer doorsteps in a very efficient way. So I think these are some of the key components of agri input e-commerce platform that we've seen in India, and many of them are growing at a significant rate, and many of them are there are many new platforms which are coming up. Second very important intervention is the market linkage, the post-harvest management. That is also very important. As I mentioned, that Indian agriculture is supply driven. So what these models are doing, they are aggregating demand. What are the points of demand aggregation? These are uh, e-commerce players like a big basket, like an Amazon, like a Flipkart. These are modern trade players, who have their own stores, a chain of stores. These are also mom and pop kirana stores. In India, we almost have 10 million mom and pop kirana stores which are, I would say, the largest seller of food products in India. How do you connect them with farmers? And also then a lot of direct to consumer models which have popped up in last few years. So, and also a lot of institutional demand, a lot of demand coming from hotels, restaurants, and catering industry. So you aggregate demand instead of you know telling farmers that we'll sell for you. You first figure out demand and then build the supply chain to cater to that demand. And there are multiple variants in this model. Some are focused exclusively on staples, non-perishable goods. Some are focused on fruits and vegetables. Some are focused on both. And we are already seeing some specialization in this segment. We are seeing startups which are focused on meat and poultry, like of Licious, Fresh to Home, Captain Fresh. Startups which are focusing on spices like chili and turmeric, building tech-enabled supply chain for efficient storage, aggregation, and transportation of these products to the end consumers. And a lot of them are also not just buying and selling from farmers, but they're also building post-harvest interventions like cold storages, like dehydration, like packing, sorting, grading facilities, which is helping farmers to earn more income. The government of India has target of doubling farmer income, and I don't think that's going to become possible unless farmers start participating in the value chain. And that can only happen when you create farm level infrastructure for value addition, essentially sorting, grading, primary processing. That can increase farmer income by 30-40%. So we are seeing those in kind of interventions like so earth food, like so phosphorus technologies. I think done a phenomenal job in building those farm level infrastructure, which is very low capex, managed by micro entrepreneurs, and farmer typically earns more income if they do value addition right at the farm. Access to finance, I think that's a huge area. It's, I would say, this is one of those areas which is still evolving. And why it is happening? Because the significant part of the supply chain is getting digitized. Bankers need data for farmer onboarding, for doing risk assessment, for figuring out when to go for loan recovery. That data was non-existent till a few years back. And that's why banks depended heavily on the rural branches to lend to farmers. It wasn't an easy task for bankers, for giving a 50,000 rupee loan, you are spending 5,000 rupees. That makes the loan, non-workable from the day one when the cost is so high. So I think this digitization is reducing the transactional cost of farmer onboarding, of doing risk assessment, risk mitigation, and efficiently recovering loan from farmers. Seeing significant amount of effort being put in by startups. The agri-tech startups are becoming agri-fintech startups because of the opportunity that is there. And in the last couple of years, I also worked with multiple banks like State Bank of India, Yes Bank, and Kotak, and all of them are saying, "Can how do we participate in agri-tech with agri-tech startups as partners for doing a lot of lending without necessarily dependent on a rural network of branches, which is usually a constraint." And of course, I've given some examples out here on the interventions in the pre-harvest and post-harvest financings, phenomenal amount of work which is happening. Data and advisory, I've spoken about it. It's a huge challenge. Data is not existent, and which makes supply chain a bit more uh, opaque and makes the decision making suboptimal for farmers and the value chain players. So a lot of these startups are collecting data from multiple sources like satellite imagery, like drones, mobile phones, spectrometers, IoT devices, sensors. So of course, one is the innovation on the hardware side. But I think the bigger innovation, I would say, where a lot of startups focus is how to mine this data. into useful insights using artificial intelligence, machine learning, how to build data science applications so that we develop some very good, very interesting insights which can help farmers, which can help a bank, which can help a food processing company. So I think that is where a lot of these models are focused on. They are developed developing very interesting algorithms. I would say the accuracy levels are still evolving, maybe 70 to 80% in most cases, but they have to go to 90-95% or even more to for customers to pay for these solutions. But I think with more data training, with more public data sets are getting available now, we'll see a lot of interesting applications of these data and advisory solutions when it comes to agri-tech. Mechanization, as I mentioned, is a huge opportunity. Mechanization in India is confused with tractorization. We sell almost 700 to 800,000 tractors a year, and the market for second-hand tractors is three times the market for new tractors. But tractors can't do all the jobs, right? You need mechanical tools. Sometimes you need application of robotics. So there's a lot of product innovation opportunities which exist. How to develop products which can solve for mechanical problems. How to harvest a horticulture crop, it's very labor intensive, right? How do we solve for challenges in uh, figuring out weeds and removing weeds from the field? Again, very, very manually intensive jobs. And that's where the opportunity for product innovation exists. And not just product innovation, also the service innovation. As I think as I mentioned in his opening remarks, farming as a service. Because a lot of these farmers can't afford a machine which is costing, let's say, $10,000 or even $5,000. What kind of service innovation, what kind of pay-per-use models can you deploy so that it becomes affordable to large section of farming community? So I think that's a huge area of where innovations are bound to come in the pre-harvest, in post-harvest storage, also in building processing units, as I mentioned, for farms, etc. Ripening chambers. There's so much potential in building mechanization solutions in, in 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 Indian agriculture. Last but not the least, I think this is something you may be familiar with: controlled environment agriculture. This is picked up quite a bit in places like US, Singapore, and I think in India also, though we have a lot of arable land, almost 161 million hectares of arable land. But having said that, you know, producing food in a very resource efficient way is the need of the hour, and that's where we're seeing application of vertical farming, hydroponics, aeroponics, aquaponics, greenhouses, polyhouses, which typically uses or optimizes the use of fertilizer and pesticides and even water, and startups are trying to build those algorithms for each crop. How do you minimize the cost of inputs and improve the productivity? The productivity increase, it could be 5x, 10x. Even in vertical farming, it is supposed to be in 100x or something like that. So I think this is a still work in progress in India, but I see there are some very good startups, and some of these startups can potentially go global. So these are, I would say, broadly six innovation themes when it comes to Indian agri-tech. So this is one of the slides which talks about some of the key agri-tech players across multiple themes that I've spoken about. Gramophone, Agrostar, Bighat, Dehat, Behta Zindagi, they're doing phenomenal amount of job on the input side. Dehat has become a full stack platform, and they also doing a lot of output now. Way cool. It's again a very large player in India. They primarily focused on South India, and again done a great job linking farmers to the markets. Agrowave is building a farm to mandi solution, which is very interesting, picking farm produce right from the farm. That's very, very interesting. Arya is one of the largest warehousing players, digitizing the whole post-harvest supply chain. Ninja Cart, again, focused primarily on fresh produce, linking farmers to the market. Fasal, Cropin, Intel Labs, SetSure have built beautiful data analytic platforms, helping not just farmers but the entire value chain players. SetSure, for example, has used satellite imagery to build farm credit scores. You can build a farm credit score using a lot of data that you capture from satellite, and of course some ground truthing data which can tell you whether farm is credit worthy or not, and that's a very interesting solution. Samognati and Jay Kisan are value chain financing companies who've done phenomenal job financing FPOs, which is farmer producer organization, and aggregators and other value chain players. Clearly, very very interesting solutions. Then we are seeing a lot of innovations on the livestock side, like Zoo Fresh and Captain Fresh and Stalab, Sadovika, building solutions for fisheries, dairy, poultry, which is also very large segment in India. And as I mentioned, novel farming systems, which is essentially controlled environment agriculture. We're seeing likes of Absolute Food and Future Farms scaling up their operations. So they're very small set. The 1,500 startups, I really can't map all of them on one slide, but this is broadly a good representative sample of some of the startups in India. Ecosystem, I think that is extremely important, as I mentioned, for agri-tech to take off. Without enabling ecosystem, it's very difficult for startups to scale the solutions. Though we have very high quality of startup entrepreneurs, you need support from universities for validation, from incubators for early stage support, especially mentoring, guidance, seed funding, and I think a phenomenal amount of effort which incubators have put in. And the reason one of the success factors for Indian agri-tech is the contribution of incubators from across uh, the country. From small places to large cities, from agri universities to private sector. I think they have done a brilliant amount of work supporting agri-tech startup when they needed the most, and we need many more incubators to get to a target of 10,000 agri-tech startups. Acceleration programs are also critical because they help startups in figuring out product market fit, in scaling those solutions. And we are seeing multiple acceleration programs, like Yes Bank is doing a acceleration program on agri-fintech. How do you build financial digital layer which can help banks to lend to farmers while you are doing your agri-tech solution? Uh, and there are many other agri Udan from AID and NAM, ID Capital from Singapore, and Rabobank also does a lot of programs in India and globally, which help startups to not just showcase the solutions to potential customers and investors, but also fine tune it. Also, government programs, I mentioned state governments are very critical. Government of Telangana is taking a lot of steps. They have a program called Sagu Bagu program to take agri-tech solution to farmers. Government has built a PPP model, public-private sector partnership model, to help startups to go to farmers. High level of commitment from the state government, and of course, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Human Resources Development, Niti Aayog, which is a think tank in Indian government, Startup India initiative. All of them are contributing in some ways in driving agri-tech. Corporate connects are extremely important. As I mentioned, a lot of corporates are participating in building and partnering with agri-tech startups. I also have a platform called ThinkAg, which we launched along with three other founders. And ThinkAg does this job of connecting corporates with startups in a very structured way, so that they can do pilots together. And a lot of these pilots end up converting into a strategic partnership. So we are trying to accelerate adoption of innovation through corporate partnership for startups at ThinkEd. Another important element of agri-tech, which is extremely critical, is having a good village level ecosystem. For a startup who's sitting in Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, if they go to village and tell farmer, look, this is what you should be doing, he'll say, no, I don't know you, I don't trust you. Why should I adopt your solution, right? And that's where the village level ecosystem becomes important. You need to find influencers, you need to find people who understand your solution and who can talk to the farmer in their language, telling what the benefits are. This could be village level entrepreneurs, this could be farmer producer organizations, this could be even NGOs who are working in that area. This could be Krishi Vigyan Kendras, the government setup of R&D institutions in rural areas. It could be agriculture universities. So we need village level participation. I think that is extremely important for farmers to adopt it, because it's ultimately it boils down to trusting the solution, and a lot of these solutions are new in the market. Why would farmer trust an agri-tech solution when his or her risk-taking capability is very, very low? Indian farmers on an average earn between $1,200 to $1,500 a year, which is not too much. So why would he risk trying to adopt a new solutions around market linkage, new input? Why would he? And that's where we need a lot of ground presence, a lot of participation from local ecosystem who knows farmer really well, who can educate farmer that if you do this, your yield will improve, your income will improve, etc. And I think we need to do a lot of work in building this village level ecosystem, and that will, I think, create a lot of jobs in India. I think that is another important multiplier effect of agri-tech in terms of creating rural livelihoods. I believe if we have 10,000 agri-tech startups, they can create maybe 10 million rural jobs. Someone who can fly drones, someone who can aggregate farm produce, someone who can manage a cold storage, someone who can provide pollination as a service, right? Someone who can provide mechanization solutions, someone who can. So there are so many opportunities which open up for rural entrepreneurs who can earn maybe 10,000 rupees, 20,000 rupees a month, which is very significant in rural area by partnering with agri-tech solution providers. Digital platforms, I think this is India has done phenomenal job in building a strong digital highways in urban India as well as rural India. You've seen applications of UPI, which has made digital payments a universal phenomena. Even small shopkeepers, even farmers, they're very comfortable doing payment through UPI. So how do you build digital infrastructure for agriculture? And government of India has been trying. I'm also working with uh, some of the bodies, government bodies, and some of the private sector companies to showcase how agri-tech can be built up, which is essentially a combination of farmer identity and farm identity. How do we club these two so that it solves the challenges of the first mile and last mile access to farmers, which is the biggest challenge for any service provider? How do you build interesting APIs on agri-stack? I think the whole revolution which I see in Indian agriculture, I think it can be brought if we start implementing agri-stack at scale. And our government of India is already working on it. There's a framework called IDEA, Indian Digital Ecosystem for Agriculture. Under that framework, they're trying to develop agri-stack, which can provide almost instant access to farmers. And of course, we need to take care of farmers' privacy and things like that, data governance, etc. That's extremely critical. The potential it has in terms of making finance available to farmers, making insurance available to farmers, making best of the inputs available to farmer, making uh, uh, price discovery easier for farmers. So many APIs can be developed if we implement AgriStack. So you better watch out in next 3 to 5 years. I'm sure AgriStack would become a reality, and we'll see some very interesting APIs being developed over and above the basic AgriStack, like we have seen in urban India when we developed this Aadhaar-based identity system, UIDAI, and we are seeing so many applications being developed over and above it. Last but not the least, the investors, they're very critical to drive agri-tech solutions, and I'll talk about them in the following slides. So this slide gives us is the names of some of the, I would say, prominent agri-tech incubators. This again, as I said, this is not an exhaustive slide. There are many more incubators, but these are some of the names which have done a phenomenal job in building the agritech ecosystem at a very, very nascent stage. AID and NAM in Hyderabad, CI, Core Time, Ahmedabad, Venture Center in Pune, Pusa Krishi in Delhi, Wilguru in Bangalore, Electriset in Hyderabad, C Camp in Bangalore, Manage in Hyderabad, Unlimited India, they focus on impact entrepreneurs, NutriHub, they focused on millets, doing phenomenal job helping startups in millets category to develop products and market those products. Social Alpha, again an impact oriented investor. I am Calcutta, Startup Oasis out of Jaipur, Labs Indigram, AIG, USX. So again, there are many, many more, as I said, who've done a phenomenal job in helping entrepreneurs are still doing. And I think we need many more incubators, maybe more than 100, to given the number of new entrepreneurs which are coming to the sector. This is a slide on the funding. Of course, the 2021 data is missing, but I can tell you that 2021, Indian Agritech received almost $1 billion. For the first time in the history of Indian Agritech, $1 billion got invested in one single calendar year. It was a path-breaking, I would say, year when it comes to investment. If you look at last 15 years or last 12 years in precise, almost $3 billion has been invested in Indian Agritech. And very interestingly, almost 75% of that has come in last 3 years between 2019 and 2021. And I hope that momentum will continue. I'm very hopeful that the annual investment rate in Indian Agritech will be on an average about $1 billion a year in years to come. And I'm hopeful between 2021 and 2030, we're going to get at least $10 billion invested in the sector, right from angel rounds to pre-series A to series A, B, C, and late stage rounds. And of course, the exits will start. I would say Indian Agritech is still in a toddler phase, and they will take some more time to give exit to investors. But we'll potentially see at least 2 or 3 IPOs happening in next 2 to 3 years, hopefully, which will give confidence to even retail investors that this is a good sector to invest in. So, an interesting time. I think more than the investment amount, it is the quality of investor, the fact that many first-time investors are participating, many overseas investors are also participating in Agritech, which is a very, very positive sign. So I have a couple of minutes left before I close. So let me close with 2 slides. One is my experience of working with Agritech entrepreneurs, and what I like about them. I think one thing which has really stands out in Indian Agritech that a lot of entrepreneurs, despite the fact that they've raised good amount of money, have been very, very frugal. I think that is so important characteristic of for an entrepreneur, being frugal. Don't spend unless it is required. So I think that is a very good approach, and that's why the mortality rate of Indian agri-tech startup is less than 5%. In other sectors, it's more than 20%. The reason a lot of agri-tech startups have been able to survive because they conserved cash in difficult times. And there's a clear approach towards value addition, not just discounts. We are seeing so many models in urban consumer internet, e-commerce, largely driven by discount-oriented mindset. And that's where you burn a lot of cash, you become unsustainable. But in agri-tech, we are seeing it's more about value creation for the farmer and for the value chain players. If you do that, it's not necessary that you need to give discounts. Unit economics is critical as it's an investor's jargon, but I think when it comes to agriculture, it becomes a bit more complicated because when you say unit economics, farmers should be making more money. As in startup, you should be making money. The person who's selling to farmer, the agri-input supplier, should be making money. The person who's buying from the farmer, as in a processor and aggregator, they should be making money. So the unit economics work at multiple levels, and if it breaks at any level, the whole chain breaks, right? So it's very interesting that the unit economics in the context of agriculture need to be seen from a supply chain perspective rather than one single entity perspective. Another trait which I like about startups is that not obsessed with fundraising. Of course, you need to raise fund to grow for growth, for driving scale, etc. But at the end of the day, you should be sustainable. You should make money on your own. You should be able to stand on your feet when it comes to use of capitalization. So that is where I see a lot of startups have done a great job that they build models which become attractive for funding, but not necessarily chasing investors all the time. I always say to startup chase customers, not investors. If you get good customers on board, investors will follow you. Another important thing is team compositions. I think that is another area which I think startups are still working on it. As I said, a lot of startups come from a non-agriculture background. So how do you build a tech expertise and how do you marry it with domain expertise is one important parameter for a startup in this sector. And how do you go about building your team? How do you go start building team below founders? How do you get a good mentor right at the beginning? That is going to be very, very important. I would say now it is not war for capital, it is war for talent. Anyone who gets good quality talent is going to win the race, right? And that's where I see that there's a potential for developing talent for agri-tech sectors, and we need to work on that as well in terms of revising our curriculum in universities, in terms of more training of graduates in the agriculture sectors, and building the necessary talent pool, which is very, very important for scaling agri-tech. Last but not the least, I like entrepreneurs who spend like 2 weeks a month in villages. How do you solve for problems when you don't know it? Sometimes your problem statement itself is not very clear. So I like entrepreneurs who go to villages and talk to farmers, spend time with them, and then say, oh, this is the problem that I need to be solving for. So you can't be solving for these challenges if you're sitting most of the time in your offices in Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to be on the ground, irrespective of what part of value chain or what kind of solution are you providing. So that's extremely critical for success of an entrepreneur. Being farmer centric all the time. And this is my last slide. Being an investor in the sector, what I see when I invest in an agri-tech startup, clearly team composition is key. The founder's profile. Do they have in it them? Do they have enough commitment? Do they have passion? Do they understand technology? Do they understand farmer challenges? I think that's very, very important. Is the team profile complementary to each other? Right. That's very important. Second is focus. What are they trying to solve? You need a very wide horizon of understanding of agriculture problems, but you need a lot of depth in terms of the solution that you're providing. Are you willing to go deep into the value chain? Can you go all the way to farmers to understand this problem? So very, very strong focus is needed. You can't be Look, agriculture sector, as I said, is full of problems and full of opportunities. It's very easy to get distracted. Oh, I can solve for this, I can solve for this. Doesn't work. You have to be focused. You solve one thing properly and other things fall in place. Scale and profitability, I think that trade-off is extremely critical. When I need to drive top line, when I need to drive bottom line, but you can't ignore either of them. I think a lot of startups made mistake in driving top line without any bottom line focus, and they are feeling the pressure now when funding has become much more, I would say, difficult and disciplined, the way it's happening in 2022. So you have to have a very, very strong bottom line focus. Part two, scale is critical. Can work in a supply chain model which can give you instant scale, and you can build scale, and you can move from one geography to another, from one crop to another one, build scale. That's one way to do it. And also, if you are into pure tech models, the initial gestation periods are long. It takes 3 years, 5 years to get the tech right, to get the product market fit right, especially when it is deep tech. But that has also a lot of value. So it's not either or situation, I'm saying, but you should be very clear that the gestation periods and and the period for your models to become sustainable can can be very different depending on what kind of solution are you providing. Business models, you should be very clear, as I mentioned, what is your core offering, what is your ancillary offering. Another very, very important factor as an investor is, are startups open to partnerships? Because you can't build everything on your own. So I think, are you willing to partner? You sometimes start to say, oh, they may compete, they may learn my tricks of the trades. So I say, let them learn and you learn how they operate, right? The market is too large. Why you're worried? The Indian food consumption is almost $700 billion, right? And if you add up the turnovers of all the agri-tech entrepreneurs, it's not even 10-15 billion dollars. So what are we talking? What ways of competition? You create the market, and that's where collaborations, partnerships become extremely critical for startups. Exit opportunities, that's extremely critical from an investor perspective. As I said, it's early days, but clearly your ability to list on stock market is very, very critical, especially for supply chain models. How do you build $100-200 million business? How do you build gross margin in excess of 20%, EBITDA margin, healthy EBITDA margins, 8 to 15%, PAT of 5 to 8%? That's very critical for you to get good value when you get listed on the stock market. So how do you build a model? Frankly, it takes time. It's not a 5 year period where you can achieve it. You have to be really exceptionally good to get to a listing within 5 years. I would say the more realistic is more like 10 to 12 years when you can move from startup stage to a listing stage, and when you can give good returns to your investors. So, and of course, then there are strategic opportunities, as I said, especially in deep tech startups. I'm seeing a lot of investors from the corporate side who want to invest in these deep tech startups to get access to good quality technology, especially let's say in biopesticide, biostimulants, image processing, new mechanical tools. There is strategic interest, but your tech has to be superior to get a good return for yourself and for your investors. So these are some of the considerations from an investor perspective, especially when it comes to agritech. So with that, I'll end my talk here. And as I said, this is just the beginning of agritech in India. We have a long, long way to go, and I'll be very keen if we can figure out a way to build cross-country corridors for agritech innovations. I think that's the opportunity that is there right now, and I think we together have to work to get these innovations move from one country to another. And the biggest beneficiary of that will be the farmers who are looking for such innovations. So with that, thank you very much to the APO team for this opportunity, and I'm open for any questions which may have come up during my talk. Over to you, Asai.
Uh, Thank you very much, Mr. Hemendra, for your wonderful and detailed presentation, which was really very informative. I hope all our viewers should get a lot of information, detailed from your presentation. And yeah, it was really an eye-opening session to learn how Indian agtech companies are trying to solve different problems across the value chains by utilizing the opportunities and also their technologies. And also, you pointed out that in next 10 years, the investment in agritech is expected to be more, at least 10 billion or more than 10 billion you have been mentioning. And out of that, I believe almost like a 95% or digital tech companies now occupied, and there are very few players for other segments. And I think again that is the opportunity for other players to come in. And you explained also different players how they are trying to solve the problems by utilizing that technologies across the different value chains. And also you pointed out different key evolution criteria from for funding from investors point of view. And also you have given a great picture on ecosystem, the enabling ecosystem, and how it drives the agtech innovations. And lastly, also you have mentioned that the investment scenario, particularly in India, looks very promising, and I hope that momentum would continue to attract more investors, I believe. And thanks again for sharing your thoughts with us. Now we open the floor for questions. And I believe we have got a couple of questions. And let me start with question number one, that is from Japan, I believe. Yes. Ms. Sato Suzuki from Japan. How can we bring these recent agri-tech innovations in affordable cost to the field level farmers who are behind in education? It means, I think, maybe low literacy level, I believe. Or what will be the government's role here? What is your thoughts on that?
Very good question. And I believe we need to be creative in taking this solution to farmers who are low in literacy. One thing which I've observed working in rural India, especially during my village visits, the farmers are very comfortable with videos, vernacular, and voice. They like to hear, they like to watch, they may not like to read. So, how do we build content which is vernacular and which can be delivered in a very user friendly format through a video or a voice? I think that is the way to reach out to farmers, especially the ones who are less literate. And that's what I'm telling government, because the question is also what's government role. I'm telling government we have so much of knowledge. We have Indian Council of Agricultural Research, and there are hundreds of institutions and universities under their ambit. There's so much of content. What are the best practices to grow a banana? What are the best practices to control weeds in soya, right? How do you improve productivity for chili crop? How do we digitize this content and make it in a format which is so easy to understand to farmer? They still look at YouTube, they look at Facebook, they look at Instagram, looking for good quality content. And there is good content. I'm not saying it's not there, but it coming from the government gives additional credibility. Right. So I think we need to build those kind of tools to make it scale. Of course, as physical extension, you can appoint people and they can go and talk to farmers. But how many farmers can you talk to when the numbers are in millions? So I think we need to build smart digital tools which are very, very easy to understand, easy to operate for farmers. They to just click a button, nothing. Put a query in their language and the answer pops up. Something like that. I believe there's a huge opportunity for a vernacular chatbot, vernacular video bot, which can answer farmer queries. So that's my answer to this question.
Thank you, Hemendra. I think same person has asked another question. Do you think these many startups, the investment will be sustainable? Again, we were talking about most of the times how sustainable, how the business is going to be sustainable. Many startups are there coming, and I think especially during this pandemic, they got disappeared. So maybe because the scenario was not good, but again, so how it's going to be sustainable from your thoughts?
Very good question. I think it's very important for startups to be sustainable. They need to be making profit while serving farmers, right? And I won't say 100% will survive, but there's opportunity for hundreds and thousands of startups to become self-sustainable. The reason I'm saying is just the sheer size of the opportunity. As I said, we consume $700 billion worth of food, and that food economy is going to cross $1 trillion very soon, right? Our agri-input market is almost $60 billion, which is going to touch $100 billion, right? So the market is large enough, and it needs innovation. Ultimately, you should be solving for farm economics. Can farmer earn 20,000 rupees more? Can he save 10,000 rupees through my application? Can he get access to credit at 7% instead of 24%? If you solve for that in a way that it starts adding to your revenue and margins, once you are deep into the farming ecosystem, you can do market access, you can do input access, you can do credit access, and you start building margins at multiple levels, not just one solution. Of course, you need to be at certain level to get to earn margins from multiple streams. But I think that opportunity exists. My personal belief is that we can absorb definitely 10,000 startups who can become self-sustainable. Beyond that, it may become competitive, but I think there are other opportunities emerging. For example, livestock sector, we don't have enough startups, maybe few dozen. With the livestock sector is 200 to 50 billion dollar. Dairy alone is almost 200 billion dollar market, right? Then there are spaces like jute, silk, these cotton, these crops still don't have enough startups. So there are many white spaces when it comes to uh, the kind of startup that we need. So I think as in 2022, I think there is enough space. The models can become self-sustainable. Maybe 2030, 2035, we may think of competition, and maybe it become more competitive and it may become race for survival, but not at this stage.
Thank you for that explanation. So again, my next question in connection with this, your current explanation, you have been mentioning, or I think you are very bullish about 10,000 startups in the coming years. I'm a bit curious of what ecosystem is really enabling them in particular. For example, if you're aiming for 10,000 startups would come into play a big role, I'm just curious to know what kind of policies are in place or what is going to be changed from policy perspective. Could you give more insights on that?
Yes, I think for that to happen, we really need more incubators. As I said, incubators played a huge role in building the startup ecosystem. My guess is we probably need more than 100 incubators to get to 10,000 startups. That's extremely important. We need a very high velocity catalytic funding ecosystem. Typically, startups at the beginning of their life cycle need maybe $10,000, $20,000, maybe $50,000, but they struggle for months to get that check. So okay, how do we build that ecosystem? VCs don't come when it is so early. So how do we, from a public ecosystem perspective, how do we build an institutional mechanism for very very early stage seed funding. I think that is another important factor. Another factor I think is validation, because a lot of these models need validation, which is only possible if you participate with some agriculture university or some research station, etc. So how do you build that validation mechanism, which is very efficient? If you have to fail fast, but you have to succeed, you should go through that mechanism. And once government says yes, this solution is validated, for example, soil testing, there's so much of demand for instant soil testing. But why a farmer would trust you unless no one is validating it? So how do we validate? How do we not just validate but also help startups improve that solution? Because there's so much of knowledge, there's so much of scientific knowledge which is residing within our ecosystem, especially public institution, that has to come forward and help this solution for a quick validation. So I think a combination of these, and of course I'm a big proponent of opening public data ecosystem, open source platforms, so that the startup don't waste time collecting data and cleaning the data. That is not their expertise. Their expertise is analyzing those data points, right? So how do you build that a very open data culture? I think that could be another way to look at it.
Thanks, Mr. Hemendra. Thanks for your insights on that. And I have another question. So from your presentation point of view. You mentioned that almost like a 95% startups at this current scenario is almost like they're in the digital technologies and all. But while comparing European countries or US and where the nutrients, biotech players are there, but I think in India these players are very less. So, from your perspective, how do you foresee these players' activity in the coming years? How they are going to, of course, because now many people they're coming from Silicon Valley to come and establish. And how do you foresee these sector would grow further? Or what are the challenges? Why they are kind of reluctant to come into this kind of sector? So, what is your thought on that?
Very good point, Asai. I think a lot of these sectors, especially agri-biotech and nutrition tech, I think these are the product development cycles are longer, maybe 3 to 5 years, right? And you need a laboratory setup, you need a lot of guidance on the technical side. The reason it has flourished in US is because of significant participation from the universities. So I think for non-digital sectors to flourish, be it biotech, be it nutrition tech, be it processing tech, be it infra tech, we need to have a significant amount of institutional partnership who can provide that setup for these models to develop. And we need patient capital. A lot of VCs look for 3x growth every quarter. It's not going to happen in these kind of solutions. So you need a lot of patient capital. You need a different kind of investor who's willing to wait for years before a lot of these firms become revenue positive. So I think that is at the core of this. We need to solve for it. We need to have more deep tech investors. We need significant participation from institutions like NIFTEM, NDRI, CFTRI, which are large and reputed national level institutions trying to build very interesting solutions, science-based solutions. How to take this science-based solution to farmers, how to build entrepreneurial models around it. That's where this marriage of institutional partnerships and entrepreneurial energy need to happen.
Yes, I think very well said on that point. I fully agree with your comment. And here again, my next question goes about the agtech penetration among the Indian farmers. Actually, there are so many players out there. Like what you said, 1,500 startups are there. But if you take from each sector, like each value, how they're giving solutions, only I could see around 6 or 7 leading players. I think one of your slides also you mentioned those companies. So I'm just curious to know what is the kind of penetration among the Indian farmers? How because like Indian farmers, not I would say not everyone is the literacy level is less. So I'm just trying to connect the because the penetration always directly connected with this literacy level. But what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. My estimate is still less than 10 to 15%. Um, Not bad in the context of the fact that agri-tech is still very, very at early stage. But yeah, there's an opportunity to take this penetration to 80, 90% at least. And now, how that will happen? And that's where I believe, as I mentioned in my presentation, we need more brand ambassadors who can say these solutions are working, these solutions are in favor of farmers. With these solutions, you can earn more income. And that's where we need a lot of village level support. A young youth, rural youth, or a young village level entrepreneur, a farmer producer organization, any progressive organization out of villages who can understand these agri-tech solution and who can convince farmers that they're good for them, right? So I think that is one layer which need to be sorted out if you really want to take agri-tech to masses. I don't think that's going to rural youth, so that they understand these agri-tech solution and they take it to farmer. They become a conduit, right? A bridge between the agri-tech and the farmers. So that's one part of it. Secondly, I would say is also how do we de-risk farmers? If he's trying to adopt a new solution, how do we de-risk his adoption? And that's where the role of insurance comes in. If you tell a farmer that don't worry, whatever happens to your crop, I'll make sure that you'll get a minimum income, right? Or a minimum yield. If you can't guarantee income, guarantee minimum yield or something like that. I think those insurance products are also near the hour. There's a company called WRMS. They have a product called Secure Farm. So they say, look, as an agri-tech company, we are saying these are package of practices that you have to adopt. You have to pay 3,000 rupees upfront at the beginning of the crop cycle. But if you adopt this practice and still your yield is not up to the mark, let's say 80% of the yield than what you expected or what is expected, then we'll compensate you for 20%. So that it becomes easier farmer to say, oh, someone is covering my downside risk, right? And he's willing to pay 3,000 rupees for this solution, right? I think we need to develop those kind of insurance products which can de-risk such adoption. I think that is very, very critical for farmers to adopt at a faster pace. At some stage, this solution become mainstream. Then, of course, probably you don't need those kind of assurances. But in the initial phase, yes, when these solutions are not mainstream, farmer who have never seen a sensor, who's never seen an IoT device, and if you tell, look, I'm going to tell you how much water you need to put into the field using these devices, he says, come on, and this is not sounding convincing. So I think at that level you need to give some sort of guarantees and assurances to farmer that it's going to work, and if it doesn't work, I'm there to compensate you.
Yes, I think, yeah, that much of kind of a confidential, like a confident um, uh, attitude should be there from the insurance point of
Right.
view. So here comes my next question. I think one of your slides also you mentioned that some agtech players are going global, actually, from after maybe success, their successful nature from Indian market, they are going to global. So I'm trying to connect how these Indian agtech solutions could be more relevant for global markets.
I think there's high degree of relevance, especially data-centric solution. Let's say solutions to figure out crop signature. The crop signature for corn will be same in India as it is in, let's say, Vietnam, or as it is in China. The crop signature for corn is not going to change, right? Likewise, quality assaying solutions. If you're doing quality assaying of, let's say, tomato using spectroscopy, so whether it's Indian tomato, whether it is tomato from China, it's not going to make a difference. Same solution applies. So I think the data-centric solutions are pretty portable across countries. And it's unfortunate that each country is trying to develop its own solution because we are not talking to each other. So some level of customization is required. I'm not saying that it is 100% copy paste kind of approach, but I would say significant part is portable, and that's where we are seeing acceptance. It's not that we are talking in air. We are seeing many startups operating in multiple countries. I'm working with Dutch embassy. I'm talking to Brazilian High Commission and Australian High Commission in Delhi, and other countries are also very open. How do we build these mechanisms? The challenge for startup is when I go to a new country, I don't understand regulation, I don't have a local partner. How do that plays very heavily, because these are startups. They see opportunity. They say India opportunity is good enough. Why should I bother about other countries? But if you build these mechanism which makes the lending very very soft, they need not bother about all of these. They just focus on the solution. Then it becomes very attractive for them, and that creates a lot of value for them. For them, for investors, if the solution becomes global. I truly believe in agri-tech. We haven't seen a $10 million revenue SaaS product, software as a service. Despite this being such a large market, why don't we have a $10 million company or a $20 million company, which is into agri SaaS? It's hard to understand, and that can only happen when we create this solution at a global level, and the value creation is substantial. And I think that's bound to happen in next few years, where you'll see a lot of global play in agri-tech, rather than each you know startups focusing on their home countries. That's going to change significantly.
Thank you, Mr. Hemendra, on your that insights. So my next question is almost like linked with your current answer. So, how APO-like organizations could play a vital role here for supporting agtech players, at least from an Asian perspective, because we play a role for all Asian countries. Just from your experience point of view, I'd like to hear from how APO-like organization could play a vital role here.
Oh, I'm very very optimistic about the role APO can play, because you have connections in every Asian country. People who are at the policy level. The local ecosystems very well. So we need to probably have an anchor organization. It can be in any country, but then we need to have local organization in each of these countries. Let's say, for example, Singapore or a Japan or a Vietnam or a Philippines or a Bangladesh or a Pakistan. We need to find local partners who are aligned in this mission. Uh, if I have to do it, I'll probably take years to crack this, right? But for APO to do it, you are already at a certain stage where finding these partners is not as difficult for you, and building an institutional mechanism. Plus, I also think that this organization will need some financial support in initial years, before it becomes self-sustainable. I'm hopeful it will become self-sustainable. So maybe some sort of funding support for the first 2 3 years, creating a secretariat, and which can run it professionally, which can talk to all the local partners, create events like this, what you're doing right now, and not just events, helping us, startups can come to you in a manner that is very efficient, and they can tell that I want to get into so and so country, I want to talk to so and so person in this country, can you help me connect? It's more facilitation support, but we need a dedicated desk. We need a dedicated organization. We need some bit of funding support. I don't know how much, but and then we need uh, inroads or some anchor organization in each of the participant country. Maybe we can start with 5 countries and see how it goes, and if it works well, we can expand to 15 or 20. I don't know how many countries are there under in APO MBIT. But let's start with Asia. There's nothing wrong. We start with Asia. I'm sure other continents would also join, given the opportunity that exists. But I'm willing to commit time, and if APO is keen, I would love to engage further to make it happen, because the beneficiaries are farmers. Let's face it. You talked about food security right at the beginning, and it's a challenge that we see. We're seeing challenges in countries like Sri Lanka. It may happen in India tomorrow. We are very happy today that there's enough grain. The monsoon is good. Things may change overnight given the way food demand is increasing, and then the climate risk. I think these are large problems, and we can't solve it on our own. We need institutions to solve for it, and that's where the role of FPU becomes extremely critical in bringing all good stakeholders, credible stakeholders, not just startups. Bring the best of the institutions, best of the universities, best of the think tanks to participate in it, and give their. I think that knowledge, if that comes under one roof, I think we can solve for it. And this is the time. I think there has to be some bit of urgency in solving for it.
Thank you very much for your advice and suggestions for APO. Definitely, we would think in our next program making. I think we should consider this point as well. I think we are running out of time already. We crossed 10-15 minutes. As a last questions, I would like to you to give a kind of a key takeaway message for our viewers today, especially the viewers who are outside of India, what they can really learn from India's success, or what could be the takeaway message for those viewers?
Yeah, I think my message is that we need to collaborate first of all. We need to build very strong entrepreneurial ecosystem in each of these countries. The number of Indian agri-tech startups, they outnumber startups in all other Asian countries put together. I don't think that's the right sort of mix. We need to build entrepreneurial ecosystem in agriculture in all the Asian countries. I'm very clear about it. And we, I won't call Indian agri-tech as a success right now. We are still learning, solving, also making mistakes. It's not that we have cracked all the problems, but I would say we made a solid start. There's a good foundation. And the entrepreneurs in India, I would say most of them are very, very open for partnerships and collaborations. And they will be more than happy. I think rather than me talking, I want them to talk as an entrepreneur. What is required in terms of solving for challenges for agriculture. So my only key takeaway for all the other countries which are participating in this program is push for entrepreneurship. To me, if you have to solve for agriculture, of course, there's policy issue, there's an infrastructure issue, but the real solution, in my opinion, is entrepreneurial energy. People who can look the problems with a different lens, who can dissect the problem with a very different lens, and who can build very, very creative, innovative solutions which are scalable. And that's where we need lots and loads of entrepreneurs. And fortunately, agriculture was never a preferred sector for a lot of entrepreneurs. I often joke with them, you are in this sector either of because of passion or because of ignorance. But I don't mind it as long as you are committed to the sector. So we need to build that army. It's like an army. If I'm saying 10,000 agritech startups in India, I would say for Asia maybe 100,000. Because we are the largest continent and we have countries, large countries in this continent. Maybe 100,000 startups in all Asian markets put together. Just look at that sheer number, and we'll solve for almost every possible challenge: the productivity, the yield, the climate issue, the food security issue, the I think name any problem. There's a solution, and there's entrepreneurs figure it out in some way. So I think that to me is probably the key message. And I would love to collaborate, learn, contribute. I think this decade is extremely critical, 2020 to 2030. If we lose this decade, I think we are going to be in serious problem. That's my personal. We are borrowing natural resources from our next generation. We will run out of food. We will run out of natural resources. We're going to make a mess of it if we don't solve it with some bit of urgency. And this 10 years are very, very critical for us to put best of our energy, our best use of capital, best use of resources that we have on hand to bring it together. And that's where agri-tech becomes extremely critical, because that's one of the key drivers for solving for the challenges that we see in our times.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Hemendra, for your wonderful key takeaway messages. With this, I thank you very much, Mr. Hemendra, for your valuable insights, and I believe all our viewers found your informations very useful and insights. And in the interest of time, we have many questions, but in the interest of time, we are unable to take all your questions. I would request to post your questions in the comment section, and we shall respond those questions in the comment box later. Yes, APO Productivity Talk will be held every week, featuring leading experts. So please subscribe this APO channel and stay tuned. Goodbye.
Goodbye and thank you.